So, in this video, we are going to create SVGs in Illustrator, so flat graphics, and we're going to import them into Blender and give them three-dimensionality. And I'm going to go over just a couple things in Illustrator, how we can build out some of our assets. So, I'm just going to do my name. Let's make her a little bit bigger. Cool. So right now it's just in text, but I'm going to right click, create outlines, and now I have a path. But I want this to be all one connected path, because if I export this as an SVG and bring it into Blender, each of the letters will be its own individual curve or own individual path, right? So what I do when I start giving it three-dimensionality, it might not all match because they're different paths. So just to kind of mitigate that and make sure everything comes together smoothly, I am just ungrouping and then moving the E closer so everything has come together, if you're writing in cursive. Then I'm going to go over here and use the shape builder tool, and as you see, when I hover over, making sure everything is selected, right? Shape builder tool, and you see the paths are now exposed, and when I hover over, this little grid pops up. So I'm just going to click and drag through. Boom. So this is all one path, and I'm just gonna take my artboard, just consolidate everything nice and neat, and then go to File, Export, Export as an SVG, and OK. And let's do one more. So there's tons of different ways to make paths and graphics depending on what you're creating, but for the simplicity of the video, I'm going to go in with the brush tool and just make some sort of weird shape. Okay. And there could be some editing I do here. Cool. And I also don't like this sharp edge, but that's just me being picky. Okay, doesn't really matter. So now I have this shape, a single path. Again, we'll go in, export, export as, we'll call it curvy SVG, replace it because I already have one named that way, and we're going to go into Blender now. So in one of my first Blender tutorials, I should have an overview of how I set up my interface, but the directions are all essentially the same. So I'm going to go to File, Import, SVG, and let's start with the name. So everything is in there. Oh, I think the little dot on the eye ended up separate, but that's okay. So very small. So I'm going to select Tab, A to select everything, S to scale, just scale it up. And then Tab to go back into object mode. So you see completely flat, but I'm going to go over here to the curve editing tab. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. I would recommend, depending on your shape, you might have to play with some of the settings. First thing we can do is change it to a 3D shape. Then we can go into geometry and we can give it a depth. So the difference is essentially 2D will fill the entire everything within the path, like the border of the path. 3D is going to fill the outlines of the path. And I'm also going to press fill mode full. Maybe give it a little bit of smoothing, and you'll see that down here on my bevel, the bigger I make it, you know, some of those wrinkles come through. We can also increase the resolution or decrease the resolution. Like I said, it may be different for everybody. And then we can offset it to expand and extrude to give it height or depth, I should say. Oops. Oh, because I switched back to 2D, it took away that full option. So I'm going to press both because that's going to be essentially the same thing, the full. So this will give it a rounded edge. And profile will give it more of a beveled, chamfered edge. Is that the correct term? Fillet edge? Either way. But we have this nice little 3D object we can go ahead and maybe, yeah, that looks big enough. What are the settings here? Just gonna copy that and put it on the dot of the eye real quick. .04. Oops. 0.04. And from here, we can also give it a material. If we wanted. I'm going to say that's good. So, and I will go over in the next video about more specific material exporting. So, I have everything selected. Oops. And I am going to press spacebar, convert to mesh. Okay. Oops. So now we do have like a little bit of a complicated mesh. But I'm going to go ahead and export it as an OBJ. Let's make sure this is on my desktop. Using Y for the up axis. And okay, cool. And we will go back into Arrow. Okay, where is, let's go to Arrow, File, Import, Name, boom. So it came in as one whole object. You see the eye is not a separate object, a separate entity. That's because in Blender, you know, I had everything selected before I went File, Export. Oops. File, Export, OBJ. And yeah, sometimes if you have a lot going on in your Blender, maybe you want to do that selected only, but essentially everything has now been exported or imported into Arrow, and this is now a object we can choose to create behavior interactions with. Great. So let's go back into Blender. Let's get rid of these guys. Actually, let's delete. I don't want that there anymore. Import, again, SVG. Let's open up that curvy. Pressing A to select, tab for, oh gosh. Tab for object or edit mode. A again to select everything. And then S to scale it up. And you see here we can also edit the path within Blender if we wanted to. So I would grab one of these vertices, G for grab, and just move it around. But you also should notice, oops, that this isn't a single path anymore. In Illustrator, it is only a single line, like a linear path. Blender has imported it as a double path, essentially. So again, I am going to go back into object mode. Let's change the color again so we can see it really nice. Maybe a little brighter. Okay. Let's do 3D. So you'll notice because it's 2D, it's filling in that entire path, right? It's filling in within the borders of the path. And when I do 3D, it will fill in each path separately. So, of course, your choice, however you want to do it. I think this looks pretty cool. Maybe give it a little bit more depth. Let's do round. And we can still go back in and edit these. Oops. Pressing R for rotate, scale, G for grab, scale, rotate. So yeah, very editable still. Let's grab these. Oop, that was an extrude. You know, I'm happy with it. And yeah, so same thing, go back to File, Export, OBJ, making sure our material group is selected. Let's call this curve. Oh, I want to do that in object mode. Export, OBJ, curve, material group is there, export. And then back into Arrow, File, Import, Curve, and you see it exported the MTL, that's the material. So make sure that when you export that OBJ with the material group, that they're in the same place. All right, so now we have our beautiful 3D curve. And again, it's an object that we can assign behaviors to in Arrow now. Cool, so I hope that was helpful.